From Anchored in Faith Gospel Church in Oxford, Iowa, this is Anchored in Faith.
So now we're going to go back to the book of Judges, back to the Wild West. And we're in chapter 19. We finished up with the tribe of Dan that just took off and headed north and went into this valley and set up an idol, and they're just going to do their own thing. And this is what's been going on in Israel since they moved into the land. Now, when they went into the land, Joshua was told to conquer everybody, to put them out of the land, all the Canaanites, all the different tribes, all the different nations that were around them. If you look at a map, a Bible map, you'll see that Israel did never occupy all the land that she was supposed to occupy. And that's what happened with Dan. They were fighting with the local Canaanites. They got tired of fighting. And so they said, we'll just move up to a new land. And so that's what they did. And so this is what's going on in Israel. There's no leadership. The system that God put in place is not being followed. We said the system was for him to rule his people through the priests and the judges and the prophets. Now, the priests were all from one tribe. The prophets and the judges were to be raised up. They would come from everywhere. And the Levites were supposed to teach the law, teach the people what God expected, receive the offerings, make the sacrifices. Every family in the Levites had a different job. If you look at the book of Leviticus, some were in the temple, some were musicians, and some were assigned to the tribes. They lived in the tribal areas. And Jesus always said, when he would heal somebody, go show yourself to the priest, because that's what you were to do. If you were, had a disease, you went to the priest, he'd give you a diagnosis, and you made your offering. And then when you were cleansed, you went back and showed yourself that God had healed you. And we said there were no doctors in Israel. There were no physicians. God was their physician. So that's kind of our background. But we're going to go to chapter 19, and I'm going to read the first few verses because this part sounds like the last part we were in. Remember, we talked about the Levite that became a household priest to this man Micah, and he just hired himself out. He made some idols. He made an ephod, and he was just going to be like, the family priest. And again, this is out of order. This is out of God's order. He wasn't even in the area he was supposed to be in. So we start with chapter 19, verse 1, and you'll see that it sounds very similar. It came to pass in these days, when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. Now, we have another Levite. This isn't the same guy as previous. This is just another Levite who's just doing his own thing. And he takes this woman to be a concubine. Now, a concubine was a secondary wife. They sometimes took more than one wife. And there was kind of an order there. Your first wife was the senior wife. We often referred to as the wife of your youth, your first wife, your first love, your first marriage. And if you had another wife, then they were, kind of down on the scale. That's just the way it was. It is today in Islam. Islam allows more than one wife, and believe me, there's a pecking order there. Anyway, he's taken this woman as a concubine, and a concubine was recognized as, a secondary wife. So that's just the way the system was then, and it still exists in a lot of places today. So he takes this woman, and this concubine played the whore against him and went away from him unto her father's house to Bethlehem, Judah, and there was there 4 whole months. So she's sleeping with other men. She's married to this man, and she's with other men. So she goes back to her father's house in Bethlehem, and this guy waits 4 months to go back to find her. Now that's a little unusual. And her husband arose and went after her to speak friendly unto her and to bring her again, having his servant with him and a couple of asses, and she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. So he waits 4 months to go after this woman, and she's in her father's house. The father's glad to see him. He welcomes him in, and again, there's not this, well, I guess I would expect there'd be some tension here if the woman went back to her father's house. The father's going to want to know what's going on, but he welcomes this guy. And they seem to be very friendly with each other. The father-in-law, the damsel's father, retained him, and he abode with him 3 days. And so they did eat and drink and lodge there. And it came to pass on the 4th day, when they arose early in the morning, that he rose up to depart. And the damsel's father said unto his son-in-law, Comfort thine heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward go your way. And they sat down and did eat and drink, both of them together. For the damsel's father had said unto the man, Be content, I pray thee, and tarry all night, and let thine heart be merry. And when the man rose up to depart, his father-in-law urged him. Therefore he lodged there again. And he rose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart. And the damsel's father said, Comfort thine heart, I pray thee. And they tarried until afternoon, and they did eat, both of them. And when the man rose up to depart, he saw he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the damsel's father, said unto him, Behold, now the day draweth toward evening. I pray you, tarry all night. Behold, the day groweth to an end. Lodge here, that thine heart may be merry, and tomorrow get you early on your way, that thou mayest go home. So he's delaying the Levites' departure. They're partying. They're getting along. He's getting along with his father-in-law. And that's a good thing. And so finally he decides he better, get out of there. And he said that, but the man would not tarry that night, but he rose up and departed and came over against Jebus. Now that's a word for Jerusalem, and it says, which is Jerusalem. And there were with him 2 asses saddled. His concubine also was with him. When they were by Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said unto his master, Come, I pray thee, and let us turn in unto the city of the Jebusites and lodge in it. And, okay, now you got to understand, Jerusalem was not the capital of Israel at this time. It was occupied by the Jebusites. They were one of these Canaanite nations, and they hadn't been driven out. And so they were going to go to the city for the night. And he says, no, I'm not going to go with strangers. Now, a stranger in Hebrew means a racial alien. In other words, a non-Israelite. A stranger, whenever you see that in the Old Testament, it means a non-Israelite, somebody that was a foreigner. And so he says, I don't want to go to this city of strangers. I want to go where, the other people of Israel are. And the commentary that I'm reading, it says at this time, Jerusalem was still in the hands of the Jebusites, and the Levite was reluctant to seek hospitality from non-Israelites. The Levites' fear is ironic. First, the Israelites had pressed toward with the conquest at the outset. Jerusalem would already have been in Israelite hands by this time. Second, the treatment they would experience at the hands of fellow Israelites in Gibeah was to be far worse than anything they could have expected from the Jebusites. Now here we have a situation coming up where the Israelites are going to act far worse than the pagans. And they would have been better off to go to Jerusalem for lodging, because when you see what happens to them, it's just shows you the spiritual condition of Israel at this time. Because, I mean, it's bad. And as we go through this, you're going to see a similarity to another account in the Bible. Okay, so he said to his servant, "Come and let us draw near to one of these places to lodge all night, in Gibeah or Ramah." And they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down upon them when they were in Gibeah, which belongeth to Benjamin. So it's part of the tribe of Benjamin. And they turned aside hither to go in and to lodge in Gibeah. And when he went in, he sat down in the street in the city, for there was no man that took them into his house to lodging. So, the custom of the time was that a stranger who was out in the street was to be welcomed in for the night and offered lodging. That was the custom in this time, in this area, because at night, of course, the cities were closed up. They had walls around them. The walls, the gates and stuff were closed, and everything pretty much shut down. And so they were waiting for somebody to offer them a place to stay for the night. And behold, there came an old man from his work out of the field at even, which was also of Mount Ephraim, and he sojourned in Gibeah, but the men of the place were Benjaminites. So he's kind of a stranger too. He's an Israelite, but he's not of the tribe of Benjamin. When he had lifted up his eyes, he saw a wayfaring man in the street of the city, and the old man said, "Whither goest thou, and whence comest thou?" And he said unto him, "We are passing from Bethlehem, Judah, toward the side of Mount Ephraim, from whence am I? And I went to Bethlehem, Judah, but I am now going to the house of the Lord, and there is no man that receiveth me to house. Yet there is both straw and provender for our asses, and there is bread and wine also for me, and for thy handmaid, and for the young man which is with thy servants. There is no want of anything." And the old man said, "Peace be with thee. Howsoever, let all thy wants lie upon me, only lodge not in the street." So he brought them into his house, gave provender to the asses, and they washed their feet and did eat and drink. Okay, so the Levite tells a story about how he's going to the house of the Lord. Well, that's not really where he's going, but that's to make himself look good. He says, well, we're going to go over to Shiloh, where the tabernacle was, and I'm a Levite, and he's using his position to kind of impress this guy. So he takes him in. The old man takes him in, gives him lodging, and here's what happens. Now we're going to see the similarity from another story. Now, as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial, which means worthless and godless. When you see that phrase, sons of Belial, that's what it means, beset the house round about and beat on the door and spake to the master of the house, the old man, saying, "Bring forth the man that came to thy house, that we may know him." Now, know him means sexually know him. This is something very common in these pagan religions, this sexual business, prostitution, men with men, women with women, men with women. Whatever you wanted was available. The worship of Baal, was more than just bowing before an idol. Much, much more than that. Because, for one thing, they had their festivals, and one of the festivals in the spring required all women above a certain age to go out in the street and have relations with any man that came up to them and have. That was the worship of Baal. Much more than just putting some kind of an offering in front of an idol. This was all part of the whole scene. And so we see this throughout the Old Testament, and it's something that God is very, very much opposed to. And it's one of the things that caused the conquest of the land, was these people were having relations with, we just described, with animals. All of this type of thing was going on. And so God got rid of them. Now, you say, well, that's years ago. Let me tell you something. That goes on today. If you do anything, if you look at anything about people who are involved in the practice of witchcraft, any of these cults like the Temple of Set or the Church of Satan, or anything like this, this is all going on. Baal is still worshipped today. He's still invoked, just like all the other gods, Diana and Molech, Chemosh, all these gods that you see in the Old Testament, they still are worshipped today. These idols are more than just stone and wood. Okay? So we have this, again, we see it, and we've seen it before, this undercurrent of stuff in Israel that's going on, this idolatry and this false worship and all this paganism that they've absorbed from the people around them, see, because they didn't conquer them. They made peace treaties with them. They put them under, they taxed them, and they did all different kinds of things. They made deals with them, and when you do that, then you kind of come together and negotiate. Solomon was great at this. Solomon married everybody he could, so he wouldn't have to go to war. So you look at Solomon and David. Solomon was David's son, and David was the warrior. David would rather fight than compromise with any of these nations. But Solomon did. Solomon was not a warrior. Solomon would rather, he was a lover, not a fighter, okay? He would marry some princess from some country so that he wouldn't have to fight, and he could have trade, and he could have all this other stuff. And they brought their worship into Israel. Because back then, we said this before, you were identified by your gods. Your nation that you were part of had a certain set of gods, and everybody knew, okay, the Romans worship Jupiter, and the Egyptians worship, Ra, and they worship all these others. And if you were an Egyptian, people recognized you by your dress, by your speech, and your gods. And so they brought all of this with them, and Solomon put up, he let these women, have their worship, and it was very, it destroyed him. And so, but even before Solomon, we have this undercurrent. And here we have these men who want to have relations with this Levite. Now, where do they get that? Because they're hooked up with Baal or one of these gods that's telling them to do this, that it's okay. So, all right. Bring forth a man that we may know him. And the man, the master of the house, went out unto them and said unto them, Nay, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not so wickedly seeing that this man is come into mine house, do not this folly. Behold, here's my daughter, a maiden, and his concubine. Them will I bring out now, and humble ye them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you, but unto this man do not so vile a thing. Okay, so we see here he's offering the women to the men. Now, that's not good. Where's God in all this? Why isn't he saying, protect me? You know, I'm an Israelite, you know. Why don't you just protect me and I don't have to do this? Where's the faith? Where's the worship? It's not there. So this man offers the women, which, you know, is not good, but the alternative was, you know, to put this Levite out and have him take him, so he doesn't know what to do. It's confusion. You know, what's the right thing to do? Well, the right thing to do would be to call out to God and just trust God to protect them, and they won't have to do any of this stuff, but they don't. So, but the men would not hearken to him, so the man took his concubine and brought her forth unto them, and they knew her and abused her all night until the morning, and when the day began to spring, they let her go. So, we have the picture here. When they came, then came the woman in the dawning of the day and fell down at the door of the man's house where her Lord was, till it was light. And her Lord rose up in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way. And behold, the woman, his concubine, was fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold. And he said unto her, Up, and let us be going. But none answered. Then the man took her up upon an ass, and the man rose up and got him unto his place. So, this woman is raped until she dies. That's just exactly what's going on. And this Levite, you know, he expects her to get up and, hey, we're going. Well, so she's already died. So he puts her on the donkey, and they just figure they're going to continue there like nothing happened. Like nothing has happened to this woman. Verse 29, and when he was come unto his house, that's back in Bethlehem, he took it. Now this is really bizarre because, you know, even the Israelites don't understand this one. He took a knife and laid hold upon his concubine and divided her together with her bones into 12 pieces and sent her into all the coasts of Israel. And so it was that all who saw it said, There is no such deed done nor seen from the day that the children of Israel came up out of the land unto this day. Consider of it, take advice, and speak your minds. Okay, in 1 Samuel 11, Saul, who was the king then, took a yoke of oxen and divided them up and sent pieces to all the tribes to bring them together for war, okay? But this, dividing this woman, there's nothing else like it. This guy is just, you know. So he sends pieces of this. This is what the mafia does. You know, they kill you and they send pieces of it to your family every 3 months. So he sends them out to all the tribes of Israel. And because he wants them to assemble themselves together and, you know, and go to war. So he sends these pieces of this woman out, and all the children of Israel went out, and the congregation was gathered together as one man from Dan even to Beersheba, with the land of Gilead unto the Lord in Mizpah. Mizpah is where they all assembled. And the chief of the people, even of all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 footmen that drew the sword. Now the children of Benjamin heard that the children of Israel were gone up to Mizpah. Then said the children of Israel, Tell us, how was this wickedness? And the Levite the husband of the woman that was slain, answered and said, I came into Gibeah that belongeth to Benjamin, and I and my concubine to lodge. And the men of Gibeah rose against me and beset the house round about me by night, and thought to have slain me. And my concubine have they forced, and she is dead. Now, he's telling a lie here. He's making himself look good. He's saying, well, I'm just an innocent preacher boy. I'm just out here, and I take lodging in this house in Benjamin. Of course, he's trying to blame the Benjaminites for doing this. And he says they broke into the house and they took my concubine and they raped her and she's dead. And they cut her up and did all this stuff. And he said, I took my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed lewdness and folly in Israel. Behold, you are all children of Israel. Give here your advice and counsel. And all the people arose as one man, saying, we will not any of us go into his tent, neither will we any of us turn unto his house. But now this shall be the thing which we will do in Gibeah. We will go up by lot against it. We will take 10 men of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 of 1,000, and 1,000 out of 10,000, to fetch victuals for the people, that they may do when they come to Gibeah of Benjamin, according to all the folly that they have wrought in Israel. So, what they're going to do is, they're going to fight against Benjamin. They're going to fight against their own brothers. See, he's convinced them that these Benjaminites did all this. Well, of course, the Levite is just, he's responsible for all of this. He allowed it. And so we have a civil war that's going to start amongst these tribes. They weren't supposed to fight each other. They were all to fight the enemy outside. We looked at Gideon, and we looked at Samson, and we looked at, Elijah and all of this. And you just see this whole, downward slope, and they've only been in the land like 100 years. I mean, Joshua led them into the land like 100 years before all this. And they were conquering everybody, and they were, victorious. And as soon as Joshua dies, everybody it's every man for himself. And so we look at our world today, and we see a church who's supposed to be like Israel, pointing people to the true God. And what are we doing? Where's the leadership? Who's standing for anything? You've got to really look to find anybody that's speaking out against anything that's going on today. Now, they're there, but, these big ministries, these big churches, the average church on the block in your town, my town, any town, is just going along to get along. And we're here because we took some kind of maybe a stand of some kind. And so this isn't something that's 4,000 years ago. This is something that's now, because we're the church. Like Israel, we're supposed to point people to the true God. And that was Israel's mission. And she's far away from that.
Full sermons are available anytime at www.anchoredinfaith.org. Contact us by calling 319-828-4815 or write us at Anchored in Faith, P.O. Box 204, Oxford, Iowa 52322, or email us at tv@anchoredinfaith.org. This has been a copyrighted presentation of Anchored in Faith Gospel Church, Oxford, Iowa.